Welcome to a place where silence prays louder than voices, where the dead don't rest in graves, they wait in pews. Tonight I'll tell you a story whispered among church walls long after midnight, a story of a woman who stayed behind to clean after the Halloween service, but wasn't alone because sometimes faith brings light, and sometimes it opens the door for something that was never meant to return. If you're watching this alone, turn the lights low, and remember, not every soul inside a church is still alive. I was the one who suggested the midnight mass. That's the part I keep replaying, the sentence I keep setting down like a lit candle and then blowing out with a shaky breath. My name is Daniel. I've been the parish priest at St. Bartholomew's for 7 years, long enough to know which pew creaks as if it had a voice, long enough to know the smell of damp hymnals after summer storms and the soft grit that gathers in the window tracks. Halloween brings teenagers to the graveyard out back and roomers to the front steps, and every year, someone asks if the old church is haunted. Every year I smile and give the polite parish answer. But this year, with attendance thinning and whispers about a woman who jumped from the old iron bridge, I said what I thought a priest should say. "We will reclaim the night," I told the Sunday crowd, small enough that I could read every face. "Midnight Mass. We'll ask for protection, not because darkness is strong, but because fear is," they clapped. I saw relief in the tired faces. I took that home like a loaf of bread. It sat warm in my hands. Only 6 came. They arrived in coats with wool cuffs and the smell of October, cold leaves, a hint of wood smoke. The wind had a lake-to-bone chill, and every time the door opened it pushed a ribbon of cold through the nave that made the candle flames lean in one direction as if looking for news. I recognized all 6. Marjorie with her polished cane, the Gomez couple, still dressed from their dinner shift, a teenage boy named Luke who sat too straight, trying to make seriousness fit him, and Mr. and Mrs. Rourke, who had lost their daughter in June and now sat as if grief had bled their posture soft. The clock over the vestibule hummed like a wasp. 11:57. I lit the sanctuary candles one by one. I could smell wax and the faint tang of brass polish from the afternoon's cleaning. The baptismal font reflected the candlelight like a dark, shallow eye. We began with a hymn, 6 voices in mine, thin but true, trembling lightly in the rafters. The organ was silent, no one to play it this late, so our voices were naked, the melody plain as an empty table. I watched my breath thicken when I spoke, small puffs that drifted toward the cold stone of the altar. Everything looked almost too clean. The white cloth crisply ironed, the chalice bright, the missal ribbon like a lifeline on the page. Ritual done right makes a person feel sturdier. I counted on it. I started the reading. I spoke of light in darkness, the old verses that have the grain of river stones from being turned in so many mouths, so many years. Somewhere beyond the walls the river moved. You don't hear it unless you stand very still. It was the stillness that told me. Halfway through my homily, my good, careful sermon about courage and superstition and how our stories can serve God or starve him, the front doors creaked. It was a slow sound, the wood dragging against winter-swollen jambs. The 6 turned their heads. The candles trembled again, leaning toward the disturbance. 7 figures entered. They were hooded, each wearing some old-fashioned black cloak with the thick shine of wet wool. The rain had begun without me noticing. I smelled it on them before I heard it on the roof, that first scattered tapping, the nave's long breath. They walked without hurry, water ticking from their hems onto the stone. No one spoke. They took a single pew together halfway down as if someone had reserved the seats. "Welcome," I said, because I am a priest and that is what my mouth knows how to do. No answer. They knelt. I couldn't see their faces. I could hear water pattering to the floor like spilled beads. One of them, the smallest, folded their hands and pressed their forehead against the rail. The river smell intensified, cold and metallic. The odor of milkweed stems when snapped, of pennies and soaked reeds. My throat wanted to cough it out. I finished the sentence I was in because I couldn't think of anything else to do. It came out thinner. "Let us pray," I said. The words had frost on them. We began the Lord's Prayer. I spoke the first words and my 6 parishioners joined in, their voices half whispers at this hour. I kept my eyes down on the missal because looking at the 7 would have felt like looking into something that could look back through me. Our voices braided. I found my place in the familiar rope of sound. That rope frayed. At first it seemed like an echo, a small misalignment of syllables in that long stone room. But no, an extra whisper slipped behind ours, then another, like a reed pipe added to an organ's rank without anyone touching the draw knob. Then a third, drier. I stumbled. The feeling was like stepping on one stair that isn't where you expect. The hair on my forearms lifted under my cassock sleeve. I realized there were more voices now than there should be. 13. I knew it before I counted. I knew it in the way you know when the room has one more person in it than your animal mind prepared for. 13 voices, all whispering, all perfectly matched, but the words, God forgive me, were wrong. Familiar but wrong, as if turned inside out. In the space between syllables, I understood. They were praying it backward. My mouth went dry. I tried to correct us by speaking louder, willing my six to cling to my cadence, but my voice felt wobbly, waterlogged in my own chest. The 7 in black didn't lift their heads. Their whisper was tireless, even relentless. I tasted iron, the candles guttered. The wind leaned hard at the windows, and then, as if something under the floor exhaled, every flame died at once. A deep, immediate dark pressed forward. The kind of dark that has weight, the kind that suggests presence. Luke gasped. Someone choked. Water moved somewhere, a quick sound like a hand dragging through a basin. I know the church by heart. In the dark, I could walk it as well as my room. But that night, the dark wasn't neutral. It wasn't the mere absence of light. It was a filled thing, thick as wool. It braided itself through the pews and hung in the air like wet velvet inches from my face. I could smell the damp of old stone lungs breathing it in. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got clearer. The backward words curled and uncurled, a tide working its patient will. I tried to say stop, but the shape that came to my tongue was wrong, a smudge. I remember the organ key. One, just one, pressed down by no hand I could see, a wooden sigh in the dark. Then another, a chord that meant nothing, bent out of key like a screen door in the wind. I thought of Helen Rourke's little girl, whose hand I had held at the font while she cried because the water was cold. I thought of the woman they said had jumped from the iron bridge, how the teenagers dared each other to spit over the side as if it were a mouth. The font was 3 steps to my right. I turned toward it. Something moved across the floor. I didn't hear footsteps. I heard the sound of water carried in fabric, of wet hems slapping, weighted as if 7 nets dragged themselves into place. The smell of the river came hard at me. Algae and belt leather, dead leaves packed under stones, mud that has never seen the sun. I think I reached out and my fingers touched wool, the sleeve of a cloak. The sensation was cold and slick, like touching the belly of a fish. I said, "In the name of..." But my mouth couldn't find the name. The backward prayer climbed my tongue like ivy. The bells in the tower rang 12 times, though the mechanism had been broken since Lent. Each strike was slightly off, as if underwater. On the 12th, the whispers fell silent. The quiet that followed felt like an inhalation waiting to be filled with scream. Lightning did not flash. Thunder did not give us back our edges. Something else did. A kind of pale light bloomed from nowhere and everywhere, not bright enough to show faces, but enough to make the pew tops shine. It was moonlight without a moon, the color of breath on glass, and in that light the 7 were gone. My 6 stared at me with faces that were only white blurs. The pew where the 7 had knelt was empty. The floor in front of it was soaked, a dark, irregular shape like a stain being born. Drops fell from the ends of the pew railings, the steady, patient rhythm of distilled time. Behind me there was a sound like a throat clearing itself. The baptismal font gurgled. I turned. Water welled up from the font as if a spring had opened beneath it. Not a spill from the roof, not a trickle down the wall. It rose steady, bulging to the very lip without running over. A lens that held the candleless room in jittery miniature. Inside it, no, this is where my certainty ends. Reflection plays tricks. Any priest who has polished a chalice knows this. But inside the round of water, something turned, pale as a wrist under river water, and the surface shivered like skin trying not to flinch. "Father," Marjorie's voice, small and old and terribly brave. I put my hand out over the font. The water bulged toward my palm as if hungry for heat. Cold licked the hairs on my wrist. The surface darkened, not like silt but like shadow lowering itself into a seat. I said the name then. It scraped my throat like a fishbone. I said it again, louder, insisting. The water shrugged. It seeped back to its line. A proper font again, the way a dog will lie down to make you stop making that voice. I don't know if that's profane. I only know what it felt like. We finished the Mass. How, I can't tell you. Habit built the steps beneath our feet where none were. My 6 came forward for communion with faces washed of all but need. The bread felt hotter than usual in my hand, as if my own skin were carrying some fever. When I placed it on Helen Rourke's tongue, her eyes filled as if a weather system had just crossed a mountain from somewhere far away. I had the terrible thought of pressing a host flat against the font's surface to see if it would be accepted or spat. I did not do it. I want that on record. After I walked the church with a dust mop and towels. The wet patches had no discipline, they wandered. In one aisle there was a trail of damp in a shape I tried not to see as human feet turned inward. The 7 had left no footprints. The 13 whispers had left a pressure in my ears like descending in an airplane. I yawned to clear it, and the sound that came out of me was backwards. I dropped the towel. I stood listening to my own breath, turn itself in the air and come back wrong through my mouth. I stayed until morning. I boiled water for tea in the rectory and brought the kettle to the sanctuary to watch it steam under the cross. The fog of it wavered and then rotated, as if turned by a hand I couldn't see. When the first light came gray and honest to the windows, I checked the font. It was white around the inside rim, as if a tide had come and gone and left a lace of salt. No one talked about the 7. The 6 avoided each other that Sunday. When I finished the dismissal, they escaped with the nervous speed of children leaving a dare. A boy I didn't recognize peered through the glass of the doors, his breath making ovals on it. I cleaned the font with a cloth that smelled faintly of the river, no matter how many times I rinsed it. That night, I dreamed I was underwater and couldn't tell whether the current was pulling me in or I had become the current. I tell this now because Halloween is again a calendar square with a circle around it, and because the old iron bridge is closed. They say the supports shifted. I stand on the bluff and hear the river in my teeth. The font behaves itself during the day. At night, if I sneak in without the lights and whisper anything at all, a psalm, a grocery list, the surface wrinkles like it's trying to remember the words the wrong way. Once, the organ made a sound without anyone near it, a low shiver of wood. I put my hand on the keys and felt cold, as if someone, somewhere had been playing the opposite of what I was about to play. When I raise the host on Sundays, the white disc blazes in the stained glass as it should, and everyone breathes out that little breath people don't know they hold. But sometimes I hear an extra breath, the 13th, the one that doesn't warm the air. Sometimes when I say the prayer at gravesides, the first shovel of dirt hits the lid with the hollow thud that makes everyone wince, and I feel the words want to go backward under my tongue. Sometimes the wind rakes the river weeds dry and they make a sound like pages turned in a hurry. I still believe in reclaiming nights. It's my vocation to believe in reclamation, body and soul. But when I pass the font in the dark, I slow. I listen. If the surface moves, not with heat, not with my own breath, but with that unnerving patience, I do not touch it. I have learned this much humility. I have learned to say the name in the simple way, without daring, without asking for proof. I have learned to leave a towel folded on the pew halfway down. I can't tell you why. It seems like the decent thing. Last week, a child I'd never seen before knocked on the sacristy door and asked for holy water for her mother's house. Because it feels wet where it shouldn't. I gave it freely, but before I did, I pressed my ear to the lip of the font. There was the faintest sound, like a choir practicing in a far room, like reeds under snow. No words I could understand. No words I want to. I filled the bottle quickly and sent the child away with her blessing and a stern instruction to keep the cap tight. I did not announce another midnight mass. I did not forbid one either. There are battles we don't win, only commemorate. The bridge remains closed, and at night something like fog moves across the road in a way fog doesn't. If you come to St. Bartholomew's around midnight and stand under the eaves, you might hear 13 voices practicing the part of the prayer that starts with deliver. You might feel your mouth want to shape the wrong syllables just to see if the river will answer. I am still here. I light the candles. I place a towel. I keep the font clean. I speak the words in the right order until morning. I carry the loaf of relief warm in my hands and set out as many pieces as there are people. I do not count to 13. They never paid me for decorating. It wasn't that kind of job. I'm the person who says yes when the clipboard needs hands and the tape dispenser walks away on its own legs. I printed the flyers. I strung fishing line through cardboard bats. I stuck glow-in-the-dark stars along the children's hallway and stacked orange donation buckets that smelled vaguely like pickles no matter how many times I washed them. The church called it a Halloween charity night, all safety and cider and blankets for the shelter, so parents wouldn't feel like they were handing their kids to a haunted house. My name is Clara, 26, freelance designer most days, volunteer at St. Michael's most nights this time of year. Because the light through the stained glass makes every mess look intentional, Father Brennan calls me indispensable, which is church for unpaid. I stayed behind to fix a tangle of fairy lights because the choir loft isn't the place to discover a short circuit when children are under it. The rest of the committee trickled out with hugs and squeaks of cold and a promise somebody would bring cider tomorrow. The boiler clicked as it took a breath. The doors whispered back into their frames. Quiet settled like a shawl. I like churches when they're empty. The air is colder but less complicated. You hear ordinary things. The tiny mouse skitter under the baseboards. The soft stick and release of your shoes on waxed tile. Your breath sheeting pale when it meets the nave's old stone lungs. You smell old wax lemon cleaner, a ghost of incense that lives in the carved wood like a memory. I collected the scissors, unplugged the lights, and put the stapler back where no one would find it anyway. When you work alone in a place for long enough, you carry the map of it in your fingers. You know which pew wobbles and which hinge cries and which switch in the sacristy is the one that kills the spotlight over the tabernacle. I flipped that switch. The gold went dark. It felt like tucking something in. I was halfway down the side aisle when I heard it, soft enough to be a mistake. A voice from the row of confessionals along the wall, whispered like cloth dragged over wood. I stopped because voices at midnight inside a locked church narrow your choices to two: prank or problem. The voice spoke again. It was deep, not masculine or feminine so much as old, and it trembled as if it had come the long way through the cold. "Forgive me," it said, a breathy scrape, "for I have risen." I let out a laugh I didn't believe in, the kind you use when the dog in the yard might be a branch. The sentence was wrong enough to make the laugh die on the way out. I knew the phrase it wanted to be. I knew what it wasn't. "Very funny," I said. My voice sounded healthier than I felt. The confessionals are dark wood cabinets softened by a century of hands. The curtains are heavy velvet that gives back a cool, dusty smell when you touch it. I put my hand on the booth's curtain and felt the cold soaked into it like the way a winter coat remembers the weather. "Youth group, I swear I will text every mother I know." "Clara," the voice said. My name, precise as a finger laid along the spine. I didn't move the curtain for a second. The tile under my shoes felt newly sloped, as if the floor had inclined the smallest degree toward that box. It's a trick of posture. You lean without noticing. You can feel yourself making the wrong choice and still make it because the other choice asked too many questions. I swept the curtain. Aside, the booth's inner light is a low-watt bulb you could stare at for an hour. The wood is scratched with hundreds of wedding rings accidentally tapping their impatience. Dozens of initials carved by regretful boys. The kneeler creaks like a tired knee. The grill is brass lattice and smooth at the edges from thumbs. She sat on the penitent side. My hair. My thrift store denim jacket with the paint flecks on the left sleeve, the ones I never could scrub out. My hands laced together the way I do when I'm trying to warm them without admitting it. My face, but emptied of me, not blank. Alert, attentive, focused on me as if I were about to say something worth hearing. Her eyes were open without blinking and wet at the rim the way mine get when I've been cutting onions. The bulb made tears shine as if they were lacquer. "Clara," she whispered, and the breath that carried it smelled faintly of metal, like the inside of a cold spoon. "Forgive me," she said, and then again slowly, "for I have risen." The part of me that believes in rational things collected evidence with frantic care. The church was locked. I had locked it. No one could have come in after the committee left. The booth is small. There's no trap door and nowhere to hide an extra girl, let alone a me. The grin I wear when I think I'm about to be the butt of a joke worked at my mouth and couldn't find purchase. I took a step back. My heel bumped the base of a pillar. The sound was loud enough to startle birds if we had any. A white cardboard box of thumbtacks I had tucked under the pew earlier chose that moment to slide, and hundreds of tiny silver points hissed across the tile in a perfect, spreading ring. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking itself into two pieces. "Okay, that's not—" I couldn't think of a word to staple to it. She tilted her head the way I do when someone is talking and I'm not sure I've heard right. The movement was subtle enough to borrow reality from every time I've seen myself in a store window. But something in it lagged, as if she were following a cue I hadn't given yet. I smelled damp, not mildew. River damp, clean and cold like the concrete under a bridge in March. Is this a mirror thing? I asked the empty air because I couldn't ask her without admitting she mattered. Some kind of projection? She blinked finally. It looked practiced, the way dancers practice collapsing. Then she stood up in one smooth motion that made the wooden slat sigh. When she straightened, she was my height and the booth became too small for both of us. The light pressed around her forehead like a thin crown. I watched my own mouth shape my name again and felt my spine brace for a touch. I ran. It wasn't brave or elegant. I skirted the thumbtacks and banged my hip on the pew and nearly took down a cardboard skeleton, taped to a column with blue painter's tape that squealed as if losing skin. I pulled the sacristy door so hard its rubber stop wheezed against the wall. The room smelled like starch and last Sunday's lilies decomposing in a sink. I grabbed the heavy brass cross from the little shelf, where the altar servers set things for processions, and suddenly I was a ridiculous person in a storage closet, clutching a shiny stick against the fear of myself. "Father?" I called toward the little office, no answer. The clock on the filing cabinet said 12:10. My phone had 4% battery. I texted the volunteer chat. "Is anyone still here? Very funny prank, you got me." The message sat without the healthy uptick of gray check marks. I heard footsteps in the nave. Slow, deliberate rubber soles making a careful conversation with tile. I stepped back into the doorway so I could see. She was walking down the center aisle with my tote bag on her shoulder. The bag's strap has a tear with a safety pin through it. She ran a finger along the back of a pew as she passed. A gesture I know because I do it when I want to feel old varnish under my skin. "Hey," I said. That syllable came out too high. She didn't turn. She lifted her hand in a lazy goodbye wave and kept moving toward the front doors. Her steps didn't slur like someone waiting. They were perfectly mine. The crash bar made its hollow clank. October air shouldered the room. She slipped out. I followed with the kind of courage that belongs to people who haven't thought ahead. Outside the parking lot was a dark plate. The security light hummed. My breath smoked. The night smelled faintly of wet leaves and a neighbor's fireplace. No one was running, not even me. The street was empty for as far as fog would let me see. She was gone the way a blown-out candle is gone. I stood in the cold long enough for the brass cross to hurt my hands. The metal held the temperature like resentment. I went back inside because I didn't know what else to do. The confessional curtain was closed again. Light bled around it, steady. My box of thumbtacks had stopped moving. The booth spoke. Not the deep voice I'd heard first. Mine. My voice inside the grill, low and fast as if practiced. "Bless me, Father," I heard myself whisper, "for I have risen." The word rose slid smooth, like oil shaken into water until it finds its skin. I reached for the curtain. I didn't open it. I pressed my ear to the velvet and felt cold soak my cartilage. From the other side of the wall, something exhaled. The wood warmed under my palm as if a living back leaned against the same panel from within. I spent the rest of the night in the sacristy because it had a door I could lock and a bulb that was defiantly ugly. I put the brass cross on the file cabinet like a paperweight on a storm. I watched my phone blink into black and die. Every hour, without any mechanism I know, the tower bell let out a single wet-sounding strike. Between the strikes, I could hear my voice in the booth, practicing contrition in a cadence I didn't recognize as mine. The phrase curled like a cat at the end of each sentence, "For I have risen." Morning hammered the windows with white. The first committee members arrived with coffees and apologies for being late. I stepped out holding a cross like a lunatic. They smiled the way people do when they encounter a stranger in a place that usually delays strangers at the door. "Can we help you?" the director asked me. She is a kind woman who calls me by name so often it feels like a nickname. She looked straight at me and found nothing to call. "It's me," I said. The syllables felt small. Clara, I stayed late for the lights. There was someone in the confessional. I think someone was in there last night. She moved her eyes past me to the booths and then back the way you look at a painting you've seen hung in a new place and you're not sure it's the same. We didn't hire a Clara, she said. Her face tried on a smile that wouldn't stay. Are you here to sign up? We're always grateful for help. My name is on every sign-in sheet, I said. My mouth had to insist on the shape of my name, like the start of a stubborn yawn. I dug in my tote for the key to the supply closet to show her I belonged here, and came up with a purse I don't own. Inside were a house key I didn't recognize, a receipt from a grocery store I don't shop at, and a cracked compact mirror. I tilted the mirror toward my face, toward the girl who had stayed up all night inside a new feeling, and for a second the glass silvered over, a blank coin. When it decided to show a face, I had to lean in to see myself, as if I were being viewed from the far end of a hallway. I touched the glass. It was warm. The sign-in sheet was clean as a bone. No Clara any day this month. The director scrolled our group chat and nothing of mine scrolled back. Old photos on my phone. Me on a ladder, me masking a straight line along the center aisle, stuttered and stuck and then reverted to gray squares. When they reappeared, I was missing from them. A broom leaned where I remembered leaning to take the picture of my own shoes. The confessional remains locked. No one remembers locking it. Father Brennan says the bolt probably fell wrong and he'll have the carpenter look at it after the fundraiser. When I put my ear to the velvet now in the daytime, I hear nothing but the weight of wood and the small interior ticking that long dead insects leave in old timber. But at night I can hear someone in there. I know the sound of my own voice when I am trying not to cry. It leaks into my vowels. It has bled into that whisper. I have stood in the nave and murmured my name like a password to the air, and the air has waited politely and failed to respond. I went home, if that's the right word for a place where the key I used yesterday lives in the wrong mouth. The landlord who has accepted my rent for 10 months asked me for ID, and the card I handed him held a face that looked like mine when I've been crying, paired with a name that wasn't mine and never has been. He said I must have moved in recently. I did not correct him. I recorded the sound in the booth on my phone last night, thinking proof could anchor me. When I hit play, the recording was empty except for my breath and the boiler knocking. But in the hiss at the edges, if I raise the volume, if I listen right, the sentence is there. Hiding the way fish hide in river glare, forgive me, for I have risen. Who do you confess to if you don't know which of you did the wrong thing? The one who left with my tote walked straight into the day like she'd been practicing living in it. And no one stopped her because I watched her practice my walk for years. The one who stayed behind learned the dark of that booth, learned to speak my name until it thinned. The one who writes this feels a draft at her ankles every time she passes the aisle where the tax spilled, and hears a pinpoint ring somewhere under the pews when the heat kicks on. As if hundreds of tiny metal mouths are answering roll call. I still work. What else is there to do? I show up. I put tape where tape needs to go. When someone says, "You're a lifesaver," I nod as if I know which life. When I pass the confessional, I keep my eyes forward. If the curtain stirs without a person, I tell myself drafts happen. If a voice that sounds like mine speaks wrong through the lattice, I become another piece of furniture that has learned patience. Tomorrow night is the charity event. There will be cider and a raffle and a child dressed as a mouse who will cry because his makeup tickles. The booth will be closed and I will not open it because I have opened it once. If you come, you will see me. I will smile and say I'm happy you're here. I will mean it. If I glance toward the row of cabinets where forgiven people have left their breath for 100 years, forgive me. I am learning which side of the wood I live on. When I sleep, my dreams set up chairs in a circle and the circle gets smaller. A light bulb hums above me like a fly against a screen. Every time I speak in the dream, the room lurches half a second late as if it has to catch up with the person using my mouth. I wake up with a taste of brass under my tongue and the feeling that I should be at a door I can't find. I lie there until morning, practicing my name silently, fitting the letters to my teeth. If you hear a voice in a booth say a sentence that should not belong to it, you can leave. You can turn your key in a lock and make it true that nothing happens after. But if you stay because the tape dispenser needs to be found, because someone has to plug in the fairy lights, because it is kinder to do the small thing than to ask the large question, then understand this. Some things that rise don't want absolution. They want a name that will take root when they say it. They want a person to practice being. They want a life that won't shiver when the air notices it. I still sign my texts with my name. The messages go through as numbers. I still tell the mirror who I am when I'm alone. The mirror listens without comment. Tonight, as I left, the booth's curtain lifted a little when I passed, the way a person lifts a curtain to peep at weather. The wood made a warm sound, a sound like a sigh that has learned obedience. Forgive me, for I have risen, or I haven't, or one of us has, and the other keeps the lamp lit. We told each other the word was abandoned, because it felt less like a dare and more like a permission slip. The cathedral had been empty since the roof collapsed over the south transept, since the diocese decided old stone wasn't worth new money. The fence was there to keep people out, which made it the only place on Halloween that felt like it wanted us. My name is Eli. 17, runner, the kid in the group whose backpack actually has a flashlight and a roll of electrician's tape, because my dad fixes things that break and taught me to love a tool that has only one job and does it well. We were 5 that night. Me, my cousin Aaron with his laugh like ripping canvas, Sadie with a thrift store coat and a mouth that doesn't ask for permission, Luis who pretended not to be scared of heights and was, and Brooke, who doesn't talk much but always shows up. We had pizza grease on our fingers and pumpkin guts under our nails and the kind of confidence that comes from being together in the dark. The old cathedral sat on the hill like a ship left high by a tide that never returned. The bell tower was wrapped in scaffolding like a broken bone in a cage. We went over the fence behind the sacristy garden where the gate bowed out from a truck once backing into it. The chain link gritted against my jacket. We dropped into the weeds that smelled like old rain and mouse nests. The air was a November wet that got into your knees. Somewhere far off, kids screamed in the happy way that ends in candy. Here, the sound emptied out into our breath. Inside, the nave was a long throat swallowed by shadow. My flashlight picked out flaking gilding and paint the color of bruised peaches. The scent was damp and something else. Old incense sunk into wood, plaster dust, a faint coppery note as if someone had bled carefully and not told anyone. We moved like thieves who hadn't decided what to steal yet. Our steps made hollow clucks on the tile where the mortar had fallen away. Pews slouched like tired men. Crypts through the choir, Aaron whispered. Not because whispering helped, but because you do it anyway in places where words feel heavier. We'd planned this. We'd found the architect's sketch online, and we'd taken a screenshot and argued over it in the group chat like we were planning a heist with stakes beyond the cool points of not being turned away by a lock. The sketch showed a stair under the choir stalls, a stone mouth with a wooden tongue of steps descending to where, the internet said, the older dead lay where they'd been put because there was nowhere better. We'd told each other stories. The telling made us brave. The listening undid it. We found the trapdoor half hidden under a warped carpet of rotted runners. The iron ring was rust blooms and the color of old blood. It took both Aaron and me and the sort of putting your back into it that shows other people what you're made of. When it came with a cough. Dust lifting in a halo, my light turned into snow. Cold reached up that wasn't the night's cold. It was cellar cold. Bone cabinet cold. I thought these places were sealed, Luis muttered, head down, pretending to redo his shoelace while not looking into the hole. They seal what people remember, Sadie said. People stop remembering. Stones don't. It was the kind of thing she says that makes the room feel like it just got a little longer. I went first because the light was mine, and because going first is easier than standing still. The wooden steps complained as if each had a story and we were interrupting. The air smelled of wet limestone. Old flowers turned to paper. A touch of that mineral smell you get when you put your head in a well. The beam cut a wedge out of the dark and found stone. It found more stone. The crypt wasn't a room so much as a stretched belly. The ceiling was low enough to make tall people duck, a long barrel of rock braced on squat columns. In my beam, the columns looked like people holding up a heavy thing as a favor. The floor was uneven, patched with plaques you could almost read and patches of dirt that remembered being inside. Along both sides, shoved into rough bays, were iron-bound coffins in stacks that made us count without wanting to. 2 high in some places, 3 where the ceiling allowed it. Iron hinges bloomed red, a soft velvet of rust. Names chased the edges of some lids, scratched shallow. On others hammered in when someone cared enough to make letters with a chisel. The air above the coffins had a stillness that wasn't empty so much as held. We stood there and let our eyes try to learn the space. Small sounds separated themselves out. Water finding a seam in distant stone. Something like a beetle with too much dignity to scramble. The thick silence that happens after a word isn't said. I felt the cold in the small bones of my ear. "There," Brooke said softly, pointing. At the far end, raised on a squat dais dark with old wax, a stone altar hunched as if mid-prayer. The front face of it lay under my light in a low shine like damp. Names were carved there. A lot of names. The chisel marks were fresh in a way that didn't obey the building's other timeline. The letters had a thin phase to them, like they'd been cut yesterday and then watched for 100 years. We moved toward it before any of us told our feet to. The surface hummed under my light the way heat does, but there was no heat. Just a faint pearly glow coming off the incised letters. The kind trick of light you see on the road at night when your eyes tell you something is wet because they don't know another word. The names weren't in order. They were woven. Some old with saints' names and long ago spellings, some that belonged to the suburban now. A Jennifer, a Mo, a kid who'd drawn a smiley face instead of carving, and someone with a better hand had come along and fixed it with a sad little dignity. "Dude," Aaron breathed. "This is insane. Like a roll call for everything. Do you hear it?" Sadie asked. She had goosebumps pressed under her sleeves. They looked like someone had typed in Braille on her skin. Like a refrigerator, but bigger. I heard it. Not a hum, not music. A pressure the way your ears know when you're in a plane coming down. A soft insistence on the inside of your head. Luis pointed the way you point to a road sign. "My last name," he said. There it was, but older, with a Z where a C should be and a date like an old coin. "What if," Aaron said, and I felt the sentence forming 2 seconds before he let it. Some sentences do that. Grow a body and start walking. What if we opened one? Not like mess it up. Just, for the story. He smiled because that smile always worked when I came home with a scraped knee from his stupid plans. He put his hand on an iron ring of a coffin lid at waist height and just tugged a little to be funny, his grin flaring and then waiting for us to yell. The air went colder. That phrase is lazy and I'll use it anyway because I don't have a better one. The temperature dropped not in the skin but in the story I thought we were in. Our breath came out white and straight, no curl to it. The beam of my flashlight picked out shimmering along the altar where it shouldn't be. The names, God help me, the names moved. It began the way frost creeps, a quiet seizure across a surface. The carved letters filled themselves in with gray, as if fog had decided to push its fingers into each mark. One by one, letters grew thick, misbehaved, scratched themselves out. Aaron's hand dropped from the ring. We stood like offenders in a classroom while chalk blurred itself into a cloud. Whole names crossed themselves out. A long horizontal as careful as any scribe. Linda gone. Jeremiah gone. A name that looked like it had been carved by hands that had never seen a school gone. The glow dulled to a negative light. Like the afterimage when you close your eyes on a TV. "That's not funny," I said to no one that could hear me. The stone made a sound like a fingernail across a plate. Another name scored itself into nothing. Sadie took a step back and hit a column with her shoulder. The sound of cloth on stone felt loud in the new silence. The pressure in my ears ratcheted tight. Louis said, "Okay," like he was agreeing with a cop to make the ticket go faster. "Look," Brooke said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. In the center of the altar's face, clean space opened like a window you didn't know could. The carved and crossed-out mess around it receded, making way with a weird, polite speed. The stone breathed once. I know how that sounds, but that's how it felt. And then new furrows opened in it as if something inside had decided on a name and was carving from beneath. L.I., it wrote. My name, then my last. The chisel marks were deeper than any of the others. So deep the shadow inside them didn't look like shadow. It looked like depth the way the black of a well looks like something you could fall into and keep falling. The glow that had thinned on the other names brightened in mine, only it wasn't light. It was a pale that hurt my eyes like snow under sun. Something touched my wrist. Not a hand. Not anything I could name. A pressure that said here with a familiarity that made bile come up hot. My light shook. It threw panicked geometry along the ceiling. Aaron made a sound like he was starting a joke and couldn't find the first word. The coffin ring he'd touched gave a single patient knock from inside wood saying, "Yes, go on." "Run," I said, and the word came out wrong like I'd borrowed it from a language that didn't correspond to running. My legs didn't listen. My thighs felt hollow. My feet pulled at the floor like boots in mud that doesn't have water in it. The beam hit faces on coffin plates, oval porcelain photographs like polite postage stamps, gray eyes that had looked into a camera a century ago and chosen to hold still forever. One blinked. No, it was my light moving. That's what I will say until I can't. The altar exhaled again and the letters of my name moistened. It looked like dew or like breath condensing in cold on a window pane. The air smelled suddenly strongly of soil turned with a spade, wet clay and an old leaf crushed. The edges of my vision sparkled the way a blackout begins. Aaron grabbed my jacket and pulled like a brother saves your life without asking. My shoulder cracked like a knuckle. We stumbled as a knot. The steps were there, then not there, then there again. I found wood with my heel and took the fall like a controlled slide. Cold scrabbled up the back of my knees. Brooke was behind me, then in front of me. Then his hand was in my spine shoving because this was no longer about bravado. It was about the animal that lives at the base of your skull and knows the shape of a door. We burst into the ruin of the choir stalls, teeth chattering we hadn't earned. The nave swallowed us with its larger dark, which felt kinder than the smaller. We ran crooked paths around pews like we were running in a dream where the hallway never ends. The sacristy door gave to my shoulder like a stubborn uncle finally moving. We hit the night air like surfacing. My lungs let out sounds I don't recognize as mine. We vaulted the fence stupid and fierce. I tore my jeans. The chain link took a skin tax and kept it. We didn't stop until the hill lay behind us and yellow streetlights turned fear into something that could be laughed at later. We didn't laugh. We went to Aaron's kitchen and didn't say crypt or coffin or my name. We said crazy and wind and old buildings are weird. We put our hands around mugs we didn't drink from. The house smelled like garlic and something clean. My mother texted me to ask if I needed a ride and I typed no and then, because I was 17 and needed to prove I could, I walked home alone because it felt like an apology I could make to the part of me that had wanted to stay. I slept in bursts. When I woke, my jaw hurt like I'd been clenching my teeth against something trying to get in that way. My sheets smelled faintly of cave and the little tendons in my wrists felt sore as if grabbed. I showered too hot, felt guilty for the heat like it was a theft. By noon, the group chat had slowed from frantic to performative memes. A brave joke from Aaron about your dramatic lighting moment. A quiet thumbs up from Brooke. Nothing. From Sadie until she sent a photo with no caption. The altar close. The glow was gone. The names around my absence were just stone again, as if someone had run a hand and erased a board. The space where my name had carved itself was clean. No furrows, no depth, just a flatness that made my eyes water. I told myself that meant we'd overreacted and that stone is only stone. Then she sent the second photo. It was a different angle, the right bay near the stairs. A coffin lid we hadn't touched iron-bound was now cocked an inch, just enough to put your fingertips under. On the dusty lid, someone, something, had dragged 4 long lines the way you make lines on a fogged window to see out. In the ash of rust, a palm had printed itself. It was too big to be any of ours. Or maybe it wasn't big. Maybe it was only deep. The 5th line, where a thumb should be, had smeared the dust in a shape like a letter. An E. The stain looked damp, we didn't go back. You'll say you would have. You're not 17 in my skin. We didn't tell anyone. Not because we were brave, but because we were sure the telling would make us small. You want to keep some sizes. In the weeks after, odd household things leaned toward wrong. My bedroom door eased open a hand's width each night and the latch didn't catch. My watch lost 2 minutes, then 3, then quit in the middle of the afternoon and came back alive at 12:03 a.m. On a run, I turned down a block I've turned down 1,000 times and reached the corner a breath later than my legs insisted I should. When I sign my name on forms now, something in my wrist hesitates at the first letter, as if the pen expects a chisel. I keep thinking the word sealed, as if saying it could become an act, like tape over a box. I kept my flashlight under my pillow until my mother found it and laughed and put it back on my desk, because she trusts walls more than I do. In the quiet parts of the night when a truck goes by and the house answers, I hear the thinnest suggestion of iron descending to stone, a coffin lid settling into a decision. And sometimes, walking home if I pass the cathedral hill and the wind is right, I hear small scratching from below the earth like mice working at a bag. It stops if I stop. It changes if I say my name out loud. I don't say my name out loud as much as I used to. Aaron texted me last night. We're good, right? I told him. Yes, because that's what you tell someone whose hand on your jacket pulled you up and gave you another day. I didn't tell him that when I got up from my desk, the indent of my wrist was on the wood longer than it should have been, like a faint wetness. I wiped it away with my sleeve and watched the shine dull. On the soft inside of my forearm, fine dust had printed 4 lines and a thumb in pale. There are stories you add light to by telling. There are stories that burn without oxygen. I don't know which this is. I only know that if you go under that church on a dare and a boy you love puts his fingers under an iron ring and smiles, because he always smiles, don't speak, don't suggest, don't offer an ending. The endings have been carved and crossed and carved again by hands that know what they're doing. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel the slow, patient weight of a chisel stroke from inside stone, writing the first letter of my name again, not hurting, measuring, and I wake with the feeling that somewhere below us all, someone is practicing writing names until the depth is right. They told me the tower was tired of being important. That was the phrase the old men used when they sat on the bench outside the bakery and watched the church with their morning tea. Let it be, they'd say when someone suggested repairing the broken clock face or mending the hatch where pigeons fattened themselves on negligence. It's a tired tower. It's earned its quiet. My name is Elias. I'm the parish priest of St. Matthias, the brick church with the stubborn ivy and the bell tower that learned to be more shadow than stone. I came here 5 years ago, after 2 busy parishes that left me feeling like a man trying to stop a river with clean towels. St. Matthias is different. The town is small enough to be remembered by its own houses. The cemetery keeps its stones low like crooked teeth. Autumn smells like damp leaves and wood smoke and a sweetness the mill spills when the afternoon wind turns our way. The bells hadn't rung since before I was born. The rope ended above the sacristy like a reminder of a promise gone stale. The old ledger says the tower took a lightning strike in 1961, and after the repairs, the council decided we didn't need bells when everyone had radios and watches. The ropes were untied. The trap up to the bell house was nailed shut, because teenagers are eternal. The bell wheel froze with its mouth half open, an animal that forgot what sound was for. No one told me the rest of the story when I arrived. You learn certain things only when you've been invited to the table where the men stop watching you and start speaking, as if you are furniture that will not betray them. The last bell ringer hanged himself in the tower in 1923. His name was Father Anselm. The ledger records it in a nervous hand. The Reverend found, "May the Lord have mercy," and then a line, as if the ink had paused to dry and never returned. No one in town says his name. If they mention him at all, they say the bell ringer, and sometimes older folks glance up at the tower before starting a sentence that doesn't need the glance. I found a photograph once in the attic, thick paper, gray as weather. A man looked back at me with the serious expression photographs used to demand. He had the long, bony face Irish priests inherit with their vocation, and eyes that looked as if they'd been rubbed with onions. His collar was very clean. Perhaps I tell you this because I want to put everything on the table before I describe what happened. The way a surgeon lays out the instruments beside the patient, each shining with purpose. Halloween is indulgent in our town. Children tilt under costumes their grandmothers hemmed, and teenagers posture with the bored bravery of people who want to be frightened on their own terms. We throw a small fair on the green, a band that knows 3 songs, cider from a drum, a stall where Mrs. Greeley sells pumpkin slices and pretends not to care whether we like them. The church door remains open for those who want to stand under stone a moment and breathe something slower than sugar. It's my habit to trim the candles, set out a plate of biscuits no one eats, and wait. That night smelled like rain but didn't deliver it. The air had the tension of a held breath. I sat in the last pew with a book I pretended to read and listened to the scrape thuds of children on the steps, the short-lived shrieks, the polite laughter that covers embarrassment. The sanctuary wore its ordinary shadows. The tower above us was a darker thing on a dark sky, 4 windows like watchful eye sockets. The broken clock face a white oval pretending to tell the hour only when the moon gave it a hand. At exactly midnight, the bells began. The first toll came like an animal clearing its throat, a deep metal that found the floorboards, ran down the pew legs and settled in my knees. Sound makes ink of air. I've thought that before in a choir loft when a soprano leans too hard into a note. This found me in the chest and stamped the blood there. The second bell arrived before my breath remembered itself. The third made the walls listen. 7 bells in all, measured out with the patience of a hand shelling peas. People outside shouted and fell quiet. I heard someone laugh because shock is sometimes laughter in the wrong suit. The sound outside stuttered into stillness. I found myself standing without the memory of standing. My book slid from the pew and made the small apologetic sound dropped books make, as if sorry to interrupt. Bells don't ring without hands. To ring ours, a man would have to cut the nails from the bell house hatch, haul them aside, climb the rotten ladder, set the wheel, draw the rope that ends above the sacristy with its greasy tail, and work a rhythm with his entire body. No radio, no clock, no wind does that as a prank. A prank has edges. I went to the sacristy. The lantern flickered dumbly in its niche. The rope that ended there, a frayed length cut decades ago, moved. Not strongly, not like a thing pulled. It quivered, a shiver that did not belong to a rope. Something else above it moved in the same spirit, an invisible arm important to itself. My throat did a small, involuntary thing. It tried to say a name and decided against it. I think I said Lord, in a tone that no catechism would recognize. The 7th bell landed, and the building uncoiled the way a cat does when a door closes on a draft. I lived close enough to touch the door within 2 breaths. I dragged the iron ring and opened to the cold. Faces had turned toward the tower without bodies beneath them. Necks craned, mouths ajar. The shared ridiculousness of everyone looking up in the same way sobering into some recognitions. Children were pressed to their parents. The band had quit in the middle of a chord, and the wind carried the sour tang of their amplifier's small death. Mrs. Greeley's knife lay on her board like a narrow verdict. "Don't," someone whispered to me as I crossed the green toward the tower. "Door, I must," I said, because sometimes the movie version of a sentence is the one that keeps your legs moving. The tower door sticks. The iron strap that should do the thing it was forged to do prefers sulking to obedience. That night it yielded like a person too tired to argue. Inside smelled of pigeon and creosote and the damp that climbs walls in old stonework like ivy that learned Latin. I took the lantern from its nail. It flared with the oily eagerness of things that know they are needed. The first ladder is honest wood. Your hands begin to remember it as you climb. The splinters, the sticky places, the rung you skip because it's rotten like a tooth. The second ladder is meaner. It asks you to turn sideways through a space designed for a man 10 stone lighter than anyone now living. I am not a heavy man. The stone scraped my shoulder regardless and left a chalk on my black shirt that looked obscene. The third ladder ends at the hatch, which had been nailed shut since before my episcopal ring was cut. Nails, big blacksmith nails that no contempt, had been pried. Not removed. Pried. Bent like fingers that did not enjoy being forced open. I put a shoulder to the hatch and it lifted on a sigh. Dust made a soft swarm. My lantern found the bell house. If you've never been in one, imagine a wooden skeleton. Imagine beams that were sanded by rope and sweat when your grandfather's grandfather hadn't begun to be considered. The big bell hung like a deep mouth opened to catch snow. Its clapper swayed gently as if remembering. The rope made a long, dignified line down through holes worn away by its insistence. And the rope moved, a small vertical ripple traveling as if drawn by hands that did not consent to be seen. I felt the wind without feeling wind. The boards under my boots shuddered, not loose, not failing, but as if something the boards believed in were touring the structure and finding it worthy. The lantern made a little sound like a thought crossed out. The flame wove and settled. He hung from the main beam. At first the shadow congratulated my fear by being exactly what I dreaded. Man-shaped, rope-spooled neck, legs heavy with the neutrality of death. But as my eyes made the adjustment light asks of them, I saw the facts. There was no body. There was shadow where a body would be, the darkness cast not by a thing but by the memory of a thing. It swayed. It obeyed gravity in a gentle, guilty way. "Father," I said, and not kindly, not even with bravado. With the heaving breath of a man told a story he doesn't like and made to repeat it. The rope twitched. My name belongs to me, and yet I heard my name in the twitch. "Elias," it said without syllables. My mouth went dry, the tongue laundered of saliva by fear. "Stop," I told the rope, because sometimes miracles are requested with the manners of a man speaking to a dog that has taken a shoe onto the lawn. The rope did not stop. It worked a patient rhythm that would have done any village proud. It did not yank. It did not cavort. It worked like a craftsman who knows you are watching and cannot change how things are done. When the bell stirred, the entire town moved with it. You could feel something below the green. Earth, perhaps. Remember what a swallow feels like when it tilts its throat to drink rain mid-flight. A sound in the floorboards behind me answered, something that lived in the church's ribs. I put the lantern down and reached for the rope. You cannot grab what isn't pulling. My hands took it the way you take a palm that isn't offered and you find only air. The rope slipped like an argument won before you entered the room. My palms burned as if remembering friction from decades I didn't live. The rope's fibers held a faint smell of oil, of sweat and beeswax and old hands. The bell tolled without asking me. I closed my fingers and felt, beneath the lack, the tremor of work carried out elsewhere, like laying your head on a distant rail and hearing a train you cannot see. There are words I am expected to say in such moments. Some I know well, some I pretend to believe in the way a man pretends to love a dish he has learned to cook beautifully, because it feeds others. I tried one. Rest, I said to the hanging absence. It made no difference. I tried another. Peace. The shape of the shadow at the beam did not change. The rope went on, small pulses traveling down as if the beam were a heart and the rope an artery, and the bell a mouth to speak what blood cannot. I do not say the unsayable words easily. I save them because they work at all only when they are not treated like matches in pockets. I said one now, the name that sits behind our names like a parent chair at a table. The shadow did not flee. The rope did not slacken. The bell took my syllables as a seasoning and tolled again. Below me, in the church proper, the nave exhaled a human chorus, fear slick with curiosity. The green gave back a sound like rain without rain. A child cried and was quieted by a mother with hands that probably smelled of pumpkins. The seventh bell landed in my bones and held on. When the echoes thinned, a quieter noise introduced itself. Paper. Pages. The little room under the bell house. The one with the ledger. The spare cushions, the broom that has outlived 3 sacristans, had its door ajar. I took the lantern to it the way a man carries a sleeping child to bed, careful of bumps, unwilling to admit he is frightened of what waking might mean. The ledger was open. I know those pages as I know the freckle on the back of my own wrist. The ink is brown where it once was black. The paper goes gentle at the edges like bread that has had time to become itself. The line for October 31st, 1923, is written in a hand that did its duty and no more. The bell ringer found. Burial discreet. Then, there was nothing there this morning. I would swear it before any court. A second line had been added and a grayness ink only gains when it refuses to announce itself. The bell's at midnight 7. The rope moves. The shadow. He will pull if we allow it. It was not signed. Something had been placed on the ledger. A small iron key on a frayed string. A smear of something on the key's tooth caught the lantern and held it weakly the way old blood pretends to be paint. The key belonged to the clockworks hatch. I had never found it. The last sexton claimed the key had been misplaced in 1980. It was not misplaced now. I will not pretend I had a plan. I acted the way you act when an animal blocks your path in a wood. You resolve to look large and move slowly, and you hope whatever hierarchy governs such moments finds you adequate. I took the key. It was cold and sticky in a way that made me swallow twice. I walked past the rope, the bell, the shadow. As I passed the beam, the air touched the back of my neck with a draft like thin fingers measuring a collar. The clockworks sit behind a narrow door, the mechanics heavy and embarrassed by their own age. The hatch was simple enough to open. The gears do not move anymore. The bell's toll had made no call on them. No cunning device had recruited their willingness. But behind the works, scratched into the wood where a man could reach only if he were both determined and hanging inches beyond safety, a phrase had been carved with the slow patience of penance. "Forgive me for letting go," it read. The carving went deep, and at the end of letting, the knife had slipped, and a long accidental line descended the board like a falling man. I stood there with that sentence in my mouth the way people stand with a wafer on their tongue and do not bite. The seventh bell's ghost still worked the air. The rope in the bell house continued its invisible habit but softened now, as if the purpose had been declared and completed. The shadow at the beam swayed until it no longer looked like swaying and became a suggestion of breath. The lantern light learned caution around it. Sound eddied and the tower emptied itself of attention. I realized I was crying only when the salt found the cracks in my lips. I came down not like a hero, not like a conqueror, but as a man carrying too many things for which he has no pockets. Outside, the town pretended to start up again. The band found a chord. Mrs. Greeley cut with theatrical ferocity and did not look me in the eye. Children made laughter in a new tone, the one that admits sleep will be complicated later. The church door yawned behind me like a patient mouth. We do records well. It is one of the small reliances of priesthood. I opened our book in the sacristy and wrote, what could I write? At midnight the bells tolled without hands. 7. I considered the rest and decided against all but this. The rope moved. A silhouette at the beam. The ledger key returned. I date it. I sign my name. I leave a line beneath it, a space for some future hand to decide what matters. The bells have not rung since. But the rope sometimes quivers when the hour is attended by a certain quiet. The shadow does not announce itself, but I feel watched from a height wherein no eyes need to blink. On nights when the town air tastes of rain that remembers other rains, a small internal part of the tower's wood gives a sound like a throat postponing a cough. I have left the hatch unnailed. It is a heresy against common sense. It is a courtesy to a man whose hands once did something difficult for the sake of those below. I do not know whether Father Anselm jumped or stepped, whether the rope burned his palms with the same insult it gave mine. I do know that when I stand at the altar and lift the bread, a tiny draft moves down from the tower and lifts the hair at my collar, as if a rope above is practicing a motion that cannot be forgotten. And when the wind is from the west and the mill turns, some clever part of the air arranges itself into the exact timbre of our bell and persuades leaves to answer. It is nothing. It is not nothing. I sleep with the ledger on my desk. The key sits on it like a punctuation mark that disapproves of endings. Sometimes when the house gives the soft, settling sounds that mean nothing, a faint scrape joins them. Rope over wood, rope over hand, rope over history. I don't look at the clock. I don't need to. I can feel the number 7 in my throat like the memory of a prayer said exactly once and forever kept. If you ask me whether the bells are broken, I will say yes. If you ask whether they stopped, I will tell you the truth I can manage. They rested a long time and now they practice. That is the truer sentence. There are hands we cannot see maintaining a rhythm we neglect at our peril. If you come to St. Matthias at midnight next, Halloween and the town goes quiet together in that innocent way crowds do when they turn their faces upward. Do not count. Do not speak. Listen. Something above will be working at its duty the way a man pulls a rope precisely because he has decided something must be done. And if in the same breath you think you see in the tower's head a weight swing gently where no weight is, don't look long. Some recognitions do not tolerate being held in the eye. I still keep biscuits in the nave no one eats. I still trim wicks until the candles consent to burn well. I still carry up those ladders from time to time with a lantern and a word that is better spent than hoarded. When I stand under the beam, I do not look up. I offer the word and wait. Often, the only answer is the careful, quiet wood makes when it remembers it is accountable. And sometimes in that guarded stillness, a single fiber of the rope caresses the air, like a sigh relieved of its body. I've been the one who stays late for as long as I've had keys. It isn't that I love cleaning. I love order, and order likes to be asked for. My name is Martha. I count the hymnals, scrape the wax, straighten the kneelers, and make sure tomorrow's first parishioner will feel like the church has been expecting them. After the Halloween service, our All Hallows Eve gathering, Father Lionel calls it, because he thinks the word Halloween scares the elderly, I do more than usual. Children leave a breadcrumb trail of glitter and leaf confetti. Someone always sets down a cup where cups aren't meant to be. The service ended with the usual soft crying and the polite rustle of coats apologizing for warmth. The choir loft ticked itself cool. The last amens hung in the rafters like cobwebs that knew better than to show themselves. People love candlelight until it's time to talk to each other in the parking lot. Then they love the dark less. When everyone left, the room exhaled. The door thumped shut with the old, slow recoil our hinges know. I went to work. I balanced the broom on my hip the way you do when your hands are doing 2 other things. The stone held the day's chill and the faint smell of wet coats. The air was a blend of stale lilies and old wax and the lemon cleaner that lifts a shine even from pews that have been touched by most of the town for a lifetime. I like being alone in there. Alone, I hear useful things. A radiator thinking about joining in, a draft squeezing itself under a door, the quiet pop of cooling wood that remembers being a tree. The church at night feels like a large, obedient animal that's good because it understands you're trying your best. I was sweeping the aisle, working up the courage to scrape wax off stone near the front where someone had spilled from an enthusiastic taper, when I noticed him. Last pew, far side. A man sitting still the way some people sit when they've been still a long time. No fidgets, no checking the phone he shouldn't have. No pretending to read the prayer card. His hands were folded on his lap as if he'd been given something to hold and wasn't sure whether to keep it. The overheads above him were off, but the remaining candles made a thin brown light. It caught the edges of his shirt and the bridge of his nose and didn't find much else. "I'm sorry," I said, "because that's my job. I am sorry when people need me to be. We're closed for the night, sir." "The service is over," he turned, not dramatically. The kind of turning that means the neck isn't used to the weight it's been asked to carry. His face was pale in a way that isn't illness. It was the pale of paper that has never seen sunlight. His eyes were hollow, not gouged, not theatrical, just emptied. Like the bowls we set out for communion after the last crumb is carefully brushed away. He looked at me as if trying to place me within a system that had stopped making sense. "I know," he said. His voice was low and level, with an old country wood in it as if he chewed syllables out of a branch to make them softer. "I'm just waiting for mine to begin." It was a sentence that needed company to make sense. It had come alone. I said, and then nothing. My breath didn't feel like it belonged to me for a moment. The way an inhaler mistake lets you know what air does for a person. The broom handle had become a staff I didn't realize I needed. The man's coat, if that's what it was, looked like old wool that had seen weather. The kind you hang in a vestibule and forget to take when you move. A faint smell came with him. Wet earth and something river cold, not rot, but the clean that's so clean it scours. "Can I help you?" I asked, the way we're taught to ask in training even if the question makes a fool of itself. He blinked once, slowly. His mouth twitched into something like a smile, learning the wrong muscles. "You already have," he said. Then he turned his face forward again. As if I were now a sound behind him, that memory had begun to soften. I set the broom against a pew and took cautious steps. From the aisle, I couldn't see his shoes. When I reached the end of the row, the pew space where he had been sitting was empty. It was fast in the way dreams make fast out of ordinary time. No creak, no scoot, nothing. My mouth cleaned itself of spit. I laughed a little, the on-purpose way you laugh so that no other sound feels brave enough to arrive. I stepped into the row and patted the wood where a person warms it. It was cold. I would tell you I thought prank and you'd believe me because Halloween gives those to you like candy you didn't want. But it wasn't a prank. The dark around the last pew felt like the particular kind that comes from places that keep their own hours. The room's ordinary stillness had been arranged into attention by someone not me. Then I saw the prints. The runner in the center aisle is ugly, industrial, chosen by a committee that thinks nobody notices rugs. Tonight it was wet from feet that had come in from the brown, new mud of the side path, where the elm drips onto the flagstones, not many feet. Ours had gone an hour ago. Across that ugly runner, beginning at the last pew, a track of muddy footprints set themselves down the center of the aisle. Not scuffs, not ghosts of prints. Full impressions, the crescent of a worn heel, the seam in a rubber sole, the slight skew of a foot that turns in. They went in a straight line like a person polite enough not to touch what isn't his. I could see where the mud had slubbed off the side of one shoe and made a darker smear. The prints led to the altar. They didn't swerve, not for the crossing aisle, not to avoid the patch of pooled candle wax, not to go around the rope that blocks the last 3 steps from the curious. They went up to that rope and somehow beyond, the way a child goes through a parent's arms when the parent can't stand being a parent for a second. On the high stone in front of the altar rail, the prints grew clearer, wetter, as if the mud had been replenished with each step. They stopped at the altar's edge, where the carved stone drops like the cliff of a table into the floor. They stopped, and the last print was only the forepart of a foot, as if the heel had nothing left to push off from. We keep a cloth on that altar I iron with more care than I give dresses. It was pulled an inch out of square as if someone had steadied themselves with a hand and then thought better of it. I put my finger on the little wrinkle, and it felt like the wrinkle a bed makes under the weight of someone sleeping on the wrong side. "Father?" I called. Because if a thing is wrong in a church and you're alone, you make the problem belong to the man with a collar. My voice sounded like it came from the radio in a neighbor's kitchen. No answer. The sacristy light under the door was the square it always is. Normal, good. We have a stone in front of the altar that's different from the others if you know how to see it. It's not marked. It's in a place where even decorations don't like to linger. It's the wrong color by a degree, like a bruise you're pretending is makeup. I noticed it my first week, when my foot found it by accident and a cold little thought climbed my leg. Someone is under that. Father Lionel says there is a family plot under the chancel, unrecorded because records burn and people don't like to think their bones are under places where living people sing. He said it in the tone you use to tell a person something you wish you didn't have to tell. The muddy prints. Stopped at that stone. I reached for my phone because pictures make the future easier to argue about. The screen slid up too eagerly and lit my face wrong. I framed the row of prints like I was documenting something someone else had done. When I clicked, the sound felt loud and tiny. The photo looked ordinary in the thumbnail. When I opened it, the aisle was there, the runner, the prints. And there, just at the last pew where I had seen the man, there was a shadow in the photo the room didn't currently have. A shape with a head bowed and hands folded, as if a person had been patient with my need to retrieve proof. The face, even zoomed, was nothing but pale shape. The eyes were hollows the way any shadow makes an eye hollow. But the mouth was considering. That's the word. It looked like someone listening to a name that isn't theirs and deciding whether to answer to it. I put the phone away because a small part of me believed the act of pocketing might pocket what I'd seen. It is surprising what you can do while imagining you're not doing it. I fetched the bucket and the scrub brush and the old towel with more holes than thread and began to clean. I started at the back, as you should, because dragging dirt into your clean is an insult to effort. The mud had a smell that came from a place under roots. It wasn't rotten. It was new and old at once. I pressed my knee into the runner and scrubbed. The water turned brown. The brown turned thin. I worked my way to the altar step by step, footprint by footprint, turning each into a stain and then a shine and then a memory in the nap. When I reached the stone before the altar, my brush hit a seam that isn't there in the other stones. A little click. The bristles flipped dirty water onto the cloth and darkened it like a spreading thought. I wrung the towel. The drop fell straight and broke itself on the letterless stone. A sound arrived, small and local. The kind of sound a throat makes when sleep becomes waking. Not loud, close. It came from under the stone. I put my palm to it because that's the sort of fool I am and felt nothing but cool. The way refrigerator shelves feel the night after you cleaned them, confident, smug. I spread my fingers and pressed harder and found not heat, never heat, but a kind of patient motion. The kind a large animal makes when it breathes heavily in its sleep on the other side of a wall. I'm sorry, I said to whatever part of the past listens. From the last pew there was a faint sound of fabric on wood, an absence shifting its weight. I turned. The pew was empty. Of course it was empty. Light from the street bounced off the high window in a way it does on late nights when the fog remembers the river. The line of the aisle I had cleaned looked like a neat scar across something that had started to heal. It should have ended there. I would have gone home, put my keys in the dish, told my cat that life is a collection of rooms we learn by hand. I would have slept badly and made myself laugh at breakfast and scolded myself for dramatics. When I finished, I rolled my cart into the closet and turned off the lights, leaving the 4 sanctuary candles to burn like lungs. I passed the last pew on my way to the door and touched the end of it the way you touch a person's shoulder to prove you're not mad. The wood was slick under my palm like the sweat of fear that has already cooled. Outside, the lot held the last of the candy wrappers, and the scent of cider gone sharp. I locked the door with the satisfaction that believes in locks. The key gave its tiny metallic sigh. The night air bit with that honest bite that saves us in early winter. At home, the photo in my phone shifted. I didn't see it happen. I just opened the gallery to show my sister what ridiculousness had happened at work. Proof of mud to justify my ruined knees. The last image, the one of the aisle, now showed exactly what the aisle looked like after I cleaned it. No prints, no smear. The cloth square again on the altar. I'm good, I know my work when I see it. At the back corner though, near the last pew, a darker suggestion waited where shadows shouldn't pool from that angle. When I zoomed, the pixels gave out too early, as if the image had been compressed to keep me decent. I put the phone face down and told myself technology misbehaves like any parishioner, and that the parishioner in question was a rectangle I could tame without starting a fight. I slept. Around 3, the time the body knows as the hour it prefers not to know, my house made the series of small, decent noises houses make. Pipes thinking, wood agreeing, wind wearing socks. Between those, a new sound threaded itself. A faint damp footfall on my hallway runner. Not bare, not boot. The weight of a shoe that had respected mud recently. One step, another. Then nothing, as if the person remembered manners and floated. In the morning there was a soup of brown on my threshold like the memory of last night's bucket. Not a footprint. The suggestion of one. A toe where a toe should be. I wiped it away with the same old towel and wrung it out and watched the water ribbon the drain like a thought deciding on a direction. I went early to the church with a reason even I believed. Someone had left a bag under a pew. In the nave, the air was the temperature of old bread. The sanctuary candles had burned down to cups of tired light. On the stone before the altar, the unmarked slab bowed slightly, a tolerance it didn't have yesterday. The cloth was straight, no prints. Nothing to send me to Father Lionel with a story that requires him to find a face that loves skepticism. I went to the last pew and sat where the man had sat. Though the idea of putting myself into the dent his absence had made my stomach shift like a crate on a deck. I folded my hands. I listened. The church is generous when a person is dumb enough to ask it for anything. It gave me what it had. The memory of the congregation breathing, the organ still warm in the pipes, the whisper of something that might be traffic, might be wind, might be prayer worn so thin it has more air than syllable. I'm just waiting for mine to begin, I heard in my head, and the sentence wasn't chilling anymore. It was ordinary in the way gravity is ordinary. He wasn't mistaken about the schedule. He was early, that's all. I still clean. I still like being last. Keys feel right in my hand. When I pass the altar stone, I don't step on it. That superstition my grandmother would approve of. When I lock the doors, I check the last pew even when I know I will find nothing but the deep, careful polish that hundreds of people have left there with their backs and their private grief. The smell of wet earth comes and goes as if the church has learned to breathe with the weather again. If, on some late night, you hear me talking to someone in there after hours, don't be unkind enough to ask me who. I'll tell you I talk to God because that's the correct answer. Maybe I do. Maybe God sits in the last pew and waits his turn like everyone else. Maybe the man comes back for practice. Maybe he's learned that beginning is a complicated thing, and that some stones consent only when a certain broom has passed, when a certain towel has wrung itself dry, when the ugly runner lies acceptably neat. Next Halloween, I will still be here picking glitter out of the floorboards with a butter knife and talking to wax as if it means to misbehave. If you see muddy prints in a straight line and they stop where no person could stop, please don't follow them with your eyes all the way down. Don't put your ear to the stone like a child at a wall trying to hear the ocean. Some kindnesses aren't for us. Some beginnings aren't either. If you sit in the last pew and fold your hands and find yourself waiting for something you can't name, I will put the broom away and pretend I don't see you. We are both working. I don't believe in cursed music. I believe in bad acoustics, frozen pipes, and the way a group will drift flat if you let your eyes leave the pitch pipe for 1 second. I'm the person who carries pencils in bulk, who circles consonants in alto parts, who knows which of our basses will bail on a high F and which soprano will gently cheat if I don't catch her. My name is Mark. I've directed the choir at St. Gideon's for 12 years. The building is older than any of us. Stone thick enough to remember winters, windows that color the floor like spilled wine. It lives in the kind of small town that thinks of Halloween as both a sugar rush and a practical joke the weather plays. We decided to do something tasteful for the town festival, not Monster Mash, not syrupy pop, but a medieval hymn I found in a book that smelled like cold linen. It was called Media Nocte Pulsant in the notation, all long notes that made it feel as if we were walking through a corridor with our hands brushing old plaster. There were marginalia beside the text, tiny Latin glosses written steeply in brown ink. The melody had a chill that didn't come from the room. This one, I said in rehearsal, clapping once because that's part of the theater of keeping people's attention. We'll never get a chance to sing it again in a setting like this. Translation? Asked Noreen, our alto who always wants to understand what her mouth is doing before it does it. At midnight they are struck and the watchers wake, I said, running my finger along the page. Vigil bells. Remember, Halloween is All Hallows Eve. It's not about plastic fangs. It's about watching through the dark. They liked that. Or at least they liked the permission to be serious. The hymn sat in their throats the way snow sits in a field, smoothing the familiar channels. If you've ever sung inside stone, you know the feeling of your voice returning to you like a colder, smarter friend. We practiced for a week. The line passed from tenors to sopranos and back to the tenors like wicker being woven. Even the dead organ, our tracker action monster whose bellows wheeze like old lungs, agreed to behave. I barred the pedals with my heel to keep the 8-foot pipes honest. Dust lifted and glittered in the late light like damp confetti. On the night before the festival, we met for a final run-through. The stone held the day's chill the way fists hold coins. When I breathed, my breath feathered in front of me, pale and temporary. I unlocked the front door just before 6. The hinges gave their slow, long complaint, the same tired voice they always used to say you've come at the wrong time. The church smelled like wax and old hymnals and the mink of mildew that lives in corners no matter how you scrub. Our heaviest singers, God love them, made the pews answer like old boats as they sat. I tucked my tuning fork under my thumb. The organ keys were yellowed like teeth you only see in old family photographs. I set the stops. Principal 8, octave 4, a touch of the Rohrflöte for roundness. The big pipes in the facade were not real, which felt like a parable I had to ignore to get anything done. From the top, I said, remember the Latin vowels. Don't chew them. Let the lines sit on the breath. Basses, find that D in your bones, we began. It was good. It was better than good. It was one of those hours when a volunteer choir sounds like it remembers being a cathedral. The phrase ends lifted together on the same breath. The altar flowers looked on from their glass vases like they approved. We should have just gone home. I called a break instead. That's how you ruin things, too much success too early. They stood on cold legs, rubbed their hands, made jokes about needing cocoa. I checked the boiler because you become a janitor when you're the director. The radiator under the choir stalls ticked like a watch that belongs to someone who will not arrive. By the time everyone settled again, twilight had climbed the windows. The glass figures, saints with faces worn down to anonymity, were just tall shadows that suggested halos instead of insisting on them. We'll do one from the top. One for the recording, I said, clipping my phone to the little stand I use when the big recorder's batteries fail. Just for posterity. You can hear how far we've... The organ made a sound. I hadn't touched it. My hands were in the air, palms outward to quiet them, and the organ spoke without me. Not a sensible chord. Not a mistake you make when a wrist gets heavy. A low breath like someone testing the weight of the bellows. The C in the lowest octave came up by itself with a speaking sort of inevitability. Then a fifth above, then a second that wanted to be a grind. The pipes didn't bark. They sighed. The sound came the way fog comes across a field. So gradual you find yourself inside it before you can point to where it began. Loose tracker, Noreen said too brightly, like a camp counselor pointing at a cloud that's not thunderhead at all. Probably, I said. My mouth was dry. Let's give it a minute. The keys depressed in front of whatever face I wasn't making. There is nothing dignified about watching wood move under invisible fingers. Each key went down with the same weight, as if exercised by a careful, practicing hand. Ghost of Father Armitage finally learning to play, joked Pete. Our baritone, whose tie knots are always perfect. Father Armitage hated the organ, said Ellen. Sweet as milk when she's not speaking about the dead. Said it was theatrical. A joke saved us. They laughed. I laughed too, like someone letting water in his mouth to keep from crying. I set my hands down and the organ stopped, like a polite thing giving back a conversation when you return to a room. I decided not to be superstitious. I counted us in again. We sang, we sounded beautiful. We did until we didn't. Half a verse in, all the air changed. There's no science I can apply to what I mean. The space inside the church felt heavier by a degree, as if the walls were paying more attention than they usually do. The organ came with us, not obeying me but traveling parallel. It put under our careful hymn a second version, skewed by a hair as if there were a mirror beside us and the music in the mirror couldn't quite resist returning the compliment. Then the extra voices began. You know the difference between an echo and a person breathing behind you. These were no echoes. They entered from the pews in neat pairs, invisible bodies fitting into empty spaces by how the air seemed to learn a shape. A line of higher, thinner sound slipped beside the sopranos. A weighty, stone-shirred bass found the bottoms of our chords and made them cavernous. There were too many voices to be the 14 I had counted when rehearsal began. The harmony didn't cloud. It clarified. The added sound made everything cruelly clean, as if someone had smoothed a sheet tight over a bed that still held the impression of the person who'd slept there. I kept conducting. That is what you do. Your hands say continue and your throat says don't. The hairs on my wrists rose under my cuffs. The floor had a faint damp that cold nights bring to stone. I smelled iron. Someone, no one, moved in the back. A figure you notice when you tell yourself you haven't noticed. Noreen's eyes flicked left and right without moving her head. Pete's jaw went rigid. Ellen's hands shook on her folder. We held the line because fear breaks and we were doing something long. From Medianoche, I said, and my cue split, one half to the people I could see, one half to the people I could not. The organ shifted registration by itself. I hadn't pulled a stop, but the sound widened. The metal pipes took on a reediness and a breath of air moved across my ankles as if a draft had its own purpose. Behind the railing, candles guttered without ceremony. Their flames went from clean to ragged peaks. I heard feet. I heard the careful way a row stands when someone important enters, the way the room waits before clapping. A murmur of syllables joined, not notes but words formed in mouths that did not believe in whispering. Latin, yes, but wrong in the way old Latin feels wrong when a novice pronounces it. A phrase walked through our hymn like a man who refuses to slide to the end of the pew. Dominus mortis. It said at the same tempo our song kept. Dominus mortis. Again slower. It didn't growl the way movies teach you growls sound. It spoke like a throat that had learned to imitate a cello. Dominus mortis. I know enough Latin to be dangerous. You do if you do church long enough. I did not need a dictionary. A chill slipped under my jacket where sweat had dampened my shirt between my shoulder blades. I felt that cold not as temperature but as recognition, a mind accepting a meaning and protesting it too late. The hymn ended. We did not. The room kept singing us in miniature, as if our music had passed through and left its wet impression on something, and that something wanted to keep the shape just to see how long it could. The organ keys moved in obedient pairs, rising, lowering, polite as children practicing scales to please someone in the next room. The extra voices ignored our breathing. They did not need to breathe. Over them, under them. Between their threads, the phrase went on. The tempo adjusted as if it leaned against my hand. Dominus mortis. Okay, I said, loudly, and the sound fell flat 6 inches in front of my face. Stop singing. My hands cut the air. My choir stopped like trained animals. The other singers didn't. The pews made room for a sound that wasn't there a moment before and has been there ever since. Noreen began to cry without embarrassment. Ellen reached for my sleeve and didn't find it. Pete made a joke and forgot the end of it. We stood stupidly listening, while the old church we loved reminded us that it had hosted winter and childbirth and plague and all the ways voices pass out of bodies. My phone still clipped to its stand recorded. The organ stilled. The keys lay under no one's fingers. The final vowel of the hymn slid into the stone until I could not tell whether I was hearing it or remembering it. The phrase stayed. It did not shout. It persisted the way a bruise persists, a pressure that finds you when you reach for a shelf and reminds you what hit you earlier. Pack up, I said, because normal verbs become rafts. Go home, I'll lock up. They went. People leave quickly when the air learns their names without permission. I stood with my hand on the rough wood of the organ bench and felt it warm under my palm, the residual heat of bodies who had never occupied it. I listened to the recording alone that night. Headphones on, curtains drawn, my house smelling of dish soap and the onion I had cut and not eaten. The track began with rustling and coughs and my count-off and one, and then our hymn. We did sound good. We sounded better than I'd thought. And then at the moment I remembered the organ playing itself, the track widened. In the headphones it opened like a door to a stairwell where people stand murmuring. The voices came out of the pews in both channels as if the microphones had learned to hear without a machine. And in that space, too clear to mistake for the shifting overtones of stone, a second voice repeated the phrase. Not whispered, not shouted, stated like a name in a ledger. Dominus mortis, said the voice. It had a texture that made me think of wet leather pulled tight. Dominus mortis. I slowed the recording in the software because I wanted to prove to myself that it was harmonics, tricks of the ear. Slowed, the voice became more itself. The consonants, which had seemed rough, sharpened. The M landed. The S at the end slid like a blade lightly along a whetstone. I sped it up. It kept its shape. I inverted the phase to cancel out the shared sound of our choir. The phrase stayed when we disappeared. I layered white noise. The phrase wrote above it, buoyant, polite. I have not deleted the file. I have copied it to 3 places because if you don't respect superstition, you have to respect backups. When I showered that night, the streaks on the mirror blurred into vertical lines behind me that made me turn too quickly and slip. The bruise on my hip flowered yellow by morning. When I left the house, my cat, who is usually political about showing affection, stood guard at the bathroom door and yowled at the empty tub. Through the day, random things tuned to the phrase. Car heater, fluorescent buzz, a kettle coming to the edge of boil. Not a melody, just the rhythm of it, the pressure of a repeat. If you don't speak Latin, your mouth will still know it after the 3rd time. You will find it annoying to hum. You will stop because it is not your phrase to use. We sang at the festival because people were expecting something, and you don't break promises to the living because of whispers from the corners of a building. We stood under a tent. The wind dragged cold fingers up our sleeves. We concluded with something cheerful, English and square and safe. Our neighbors clapped as neighbors do. A child cried because his hand was too cold to hold his lollipop stick. Behind the tent, beyond the generator's chatter, I heard a single word, repeated, at a distance that felt like the length between a name and its meaning. I still run rehearsals. We've moved to the parish hall for now because the church is undergoing maintenance, and also because I can't trust myself to keep a face if the organ decides to practice without me. My people sing well and look to me for the count and the breath. I have, without telling anyone, stopped programming Latin. I say it's for accessibility. That is not true. In my house at night, the kettle sometimes asks me, gently, to consider the Lord of Death, and I take it off before it can finish the suggestion. I walked into St. Gideon's alone 2 nights ago with a flashlight and a practical mood. The flashlight insisted on finding dust. Dust is the honest record of heirs' errands. The beam went long and narrow down the aisle, catching the edges of the pews, the scuff where a coffin has nicked the end of a bench, the wax grains like white gravel around a stand. The organ, stripped of its romance, looked like a cabinet full of secrets it would never tell me because it wasn't mine to know. I pressed one key without opening the stops. The wood on wood made a small cluck. The sound lifted, caught nothing, fell. Behind me, this is the stupid part. The part that would get me killed in a film. I said the phrase out loud to feed the fear, like a child who proves a house is empty by calling hello. I shaped it carefully, the vowels round, the consonants attentive, as if my teacher might be listening for my grade. My breath made a small cloud in the beam. In that cloud I saw the word hang for a half-second longer than physics should have allowed. I left. I locked the door. I stood outside under a sky that had stopped being generous for the season and watched my breath go into it. Not mine anymore. Somewhere in that big dark, a thin answer came back, small and satisfied, as if something had made a neat check mark next to a line on a list. I still don't believe in cursed music. I don't believe that singing wrong makes a door open. I believe that very old buildings and very old words hold hands in ways we aren't meant to watch. I'm the man who claps once to get your attention and twice to release you. I hold up my hand for the cutoff and everyone's voice lands at the same time, gently. That's all conducting is, convincing people to stop together. It's late as I tell you this. The boiler ticks. In the kitchen, the kettle is quiet. Through my headphones, if I click play, I can hear us. The good hour when we sounded like we belonged to something older. And beneath us, clear as brass, the reminder that the festival wasn't for us. When the track ends, I sit there longer than the silence because endings are too sudden for the body to accept. And in that post-silence, if I'm very honest, I hear the phrase begin again as if the track never stopped and I have only been pretending to pause it. Dominus mortis. There's steadiness in a thing that repeats, even if it isn't yours. I wasn't supposed to be the one to light them. That was usually Father Keating's job. White robe, careful hands, the small ceremony that makes people feel steadier. But he'd been called to St. Mary's across town to sit with a family, and I was the person with a key and a talent for doing the quiet work no one notices until it's not done. My name is Lucy. I make the church bulletin, proofread prayers that change soul to soil if you're not careful, and keep the storage closet sane. I know where the extra votives live and where the good matches hide. The candlelight vigil is what our parish does to make Halloween feel like a vigil and not a sugar holiday. We line the center aisle with glass cylinders and set a candle for every parishioner we've lost since last All Saints. Families come and touch warm glass and swallow hard. We read names. People cry in the polite, soft way that says they're grateful for an excuse. It was late afternoon when I started. The church holds cold the way stone does. A practical chill, not dramatic, the kind that keeps flowers honest. My breath made little puffs in the side aisles. The air smelled like old wax and wood polish, and a faint ghost of incense worked into the pews over decades. I rolled the cart down the nave, each glass cylinder a clear throat waiting for its voice. The votives had that cheap paraffin smell that sticks to your sleeves. I set them in their places and thought of faces because that's what the list of names does if you know the people behind the type. By the time I finished, the light through the stained glass had gone from colored to dull, like the windows had decided to keep the day for themselves. I stood in the center aisle and looked at the line of unlit candles, small and obedient, and felt the tiny flinch I always feel before striking the first match. Fire still startles me. That's honest, I guess. I lit them left to right, working my way toward the altar. Each wick drank flame, coughed smoke, then steadied, 100 little domestic suns breathing in unison. The glass warmed under my fingers as I straightened the cylinders, a compulsive grazer keeping the row neat. Wax began its slow life work of softening. The sound in the room changed. If you've ever lit that many candles, you know it. The faint, collective hiss that turns the air into a simmer. I kept the list on my clipboard. Daniel, Ruth, Marta, Thomas, Edie, John. Each name had a candle. Each candle had a small circle of shadowless light. I tried not to count lives with my hands. That's not a healthy habit. When I reached the front pew, there was one unlit, the last. I had set it in a place I reserve for people no one claims. A habit I'm not sure is theological, but it feels decent. A man named Clarence, who used to fill the holy water and never shook your hand, died alone last winter. We gave him a candle. This was that spot, the end near the baptismal font. I struck the match and the room flinched the way it does when you make a small sound in a place that wants to be left alone. I touched the flame to the wick. It took and then it didn't. A little bead of wax darkened around the black thread. I tipped the glass to shelter the wick from a draft I couldn't feel. The flame caught and went coal dark. I've seen a candle smoke. I've seen a wick char and refuse. I had not seen a flame burn black. It made light, you could see it moving, but the light it threw was more like the negative of light. The glass around it went darker, a rippling shadow shivering where clean heat should have been. The air above it wrinkled without brightness, as if a knot in the room's fabric had been tied there by someone careful. I did the sensible thing and told myself it was soot. I pinched the wick, relit it. The match heads in the box had that sulfur tang that makes my nose prickle. The second flame did the same. It lay down black and kept its shape like a pressed flower that refuses to crumble. I felt the skin on my arms pull tight as if the air had dropped a degree. The hair along my forearms stood. I rubbed my thumb hard along my palm to do something that had a simple cause and effect. I took my phone from my sweater pocket to snap a picture for the bulletin. The line of candles. The warm, pretty thing people expect to see next to the list of names. The picture I framed was good. A long, glowing aisle of thoughtfulness. The screen made the black flame look normal. Yellow-white, no better, no worse than the others. I breathed out, fine. Phone lies for us all the time. Then the focus pulsed, the way it does when light changes. The photo rolled itself into the gallery with the soft little click I've taught my brain to find satisfying. I opened it because I'm fussy. The image was beautiful. The glass cylinders made clean river doubles of their flames. The pews were ghosted. The stained glass looked like stuck evening. And there were faces. More of them than the number of candles. At the windows, pressed to the glass like children outside a bakery. Some looked amused in that absent thin way old portraits do. Some smiled with their lips together like people being good. One in the corner grinned too wide in a way my body recognized as wrong before my mind found a word. When I zoomed in, the pixels gave up detail, but the expressions did not. In the pane beside the choir loft, a woman with hair in a scarf and teeth slightly apart. Familiar. I couldn't place her. In the back door's small glass, a face I didn't want to learn. The air went thinner. That's the only way I have for it, as if the room had exhaled and paused too long before breathing again. A draft I couldn't source licked around my ankles. The candles along the aisle shivered. Wicks elongated and steadied like small brave spines. The black flame didn't move. It made the room around it hold still as if posing. I ducked into the sacristy, because the sacristy has ugly light and file cabinets and a phone that rings like a bell from a lesser heaven. I clicked the overhead. Fluorescent hum filled the gap in me. I put the phone on the desk and looked again. The faces were still there. In the reflection of the glass of the framed St. Francis over the desk, I could see my own face white as paper with a little wet at the lip that meant I'd been biting it. Get a grip, I told myself. I printed the vigil program anyway because verbs are a way of insisting on reality. The printer made its smug little swishing noises. I stacked the pages and smoothed them hard. By 6, people began to arrive. Coats, whispers, knees against pew ends, coughs. The candlelight made their faces generous. Father Keating slipped in from his visit wearing the staleness heavy rooms give the living. He thanked me. He didn't ask about the black flame because in person it looked ordinary. Sometimes that's the kindness the world offers. Wrong things that agree to look right if you stand close. We read the names. The sound of one voice saying 2 names for a marriage, whispering the second like an apology. The sigh people make after clapping without clapping. When we invited families to approach and touch the glass, hands broke from sleeves like timid animals. People whispered to their dead because we do that. I watched a boy press his forehead to a cylinder as if listening for the ocean. The black flame breathed, if that's the word. The glass around it seemed to hold the reflection of a face even when no one stood before it. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, a phantom message. I slid it out, reflex sin. A new photo sat in the gallery. I hadn't taken it. The angle was from the back, high like someone standing on the choir loft rail and leaning out. The candles blazed in 2 clean lines. The aisle drew the eye toward me, a small figure near the font. And at the windows in that picture. Not in the room I could touch, faces pressed hard enough to flatten noses against the panes. Smiling, like people at the end of a joke whose punchline is finally coming true. Turned the phone face down and swallowed bile. If I ran, I'd knock candles. A strip of fire would skid into the aisle. I would be the woman who lit herself and we would make a folktale. So I stayed and moved in tiny, useful ways. A hand on a shoulder, a Kleenex out of nowhere, a reminder to let the child blow out his candle from a respectful angle. I was so good you wouldn't believe how scared that goodness was. We closed the vigil with a hymn so simple a person could rest inside it like a chair. People left quieter than they came, as if the cold air out there were harder to justify after all that warmth in here. I blew out the vigil candles one by one, a carbon taste crawling up the back of my throat, a little ache in the cheeks from the constant gentle exhale. The room returned to its original dim. The black flame was last. I cupped it with my hand and blew. The shadow didn't so much go out as fold. The glass fogged. I watched the fog clear. Night turned the windows into black panels. If there were faces there, they chose not to show me. I locked the side door. The big door we keep on the latch clunked, all ordinary. I walked home down a street that smelled like cold and rot leaves in someone's fireplace. My keys bit my palm in small familiar ways. I slept with the light on like a person who trusts a bulb more than herself. In the morning, I came early to reset the room and wipe the wax chips nobody sees and to replace the puddled votives with fresh, so the Sunday crowd could have their clean illusions. The sunlight came gray through the east windows. It was the kind of morning that makes coffee taste like medicine. One candle didn't look right. It wasn't the black one. That cylinder looked fine. A normal dirty ring around its inner lip. A normal clot of cooled wax around the wick. No, it was 3 rows back, right side. Aisle seat. The spot where Marta's daughter had stood with her hand flat against the glass like she could transfer herself. The candle there had melted wrong. Not pooled, not slumped. Not the lazy collapse of heat and time. The wax had found a shape and decided to hold it. Fingers distinct. A palm cupped as if to cradle a small round thing. A human hand. Pale and slightly translucent where the sun came. Thumb bent in the crooked way arthritis teaches you to cheat. The wick lay along the crease of the lifeline like a vein. I did not call Father Keating because I knew exactly what voice he would use, and I didn't think I could carry the next hour if I had to hear it. I touched the wax hand. It was cold in a way that felt unfair. The ridges along the fingers were too convincing. There was the hint of a nail bed. The line that crosses my own palm had the same little hitch just under the ring finger. I pressed my palm to the wax palm and felt nothing but the fact that my hand is a warm animal, and this one wasn't. The picture on my phone had changed in the night. The gallery thumbnail showed the same angle as before, but the faces at the windows had turned. They were no longer looking in. The one in the corner I didn't want to know had its face angled toward the camera, smile gone, teeth showing. Not as threat, not as friendliness, just as anatomy. When I opened the image, the pixels held steady, crisp. The windows were empty. The glass shone like glass. The aisle was vacant. And yet, when I pinched to zoom on the black flame cylinder, faintly in the curve of the glass there was a reflection that did not respect optics. A hand, reaching. I did the small things. I set bulletins on the table. I found the stray bobby pin in the pew and put it with the other lost little medals in the drawer that makes us feel benevolent. I left the wax hand where it was because I couldn't think of a way to move it that wasn't barbaric or foolish. When people came for Mass, they gasped in the tidy parish way and asked, "Is that for All Saints?" And I said, yes, because it was easier than explaining I didn't know the terms. I still have the photo. It changes sometimes. It doesn't, it shows me what I can stand. If I hold it up in the sanctuary at night, the glass catches my face and adds one more next to mine for a second, and together we look like a matching set. When I pass the spot of the black flame, there's a chill I feel in the bones of my fingers, like they remember holding something heavier than they should. The vigil is yearly. People will ask me again to light the candles because I am good at making small things look cared for. I will say yes. Someone will press their palm to cooled glass and feel warmth left by someone else and take it as comfort. Maybe that's all this is. Heat-holding substances and the lies we tell with care. Maybe. But in the morning, some part of what comes to be counted finds a way to stay. Wax will choose a shape. A name will catch in a throat and refuse to move on. A picture will decide who was there. If you stand by the windows at dusk and look out instead of in, you can see the faintest reflection of the aisle on the glass. And inside that reflection, if you breathe slow, more faces than we have candles. I'm the one who still knows where the good matches are. My hands don't shake when I strike one. The sulfur sting makes my nose smart and brings me back to earth. I light what I'm given to light and count what I'm given to count, and when I blow a flame out, I watch the smoke rise and fold and try not to see the way it almost looks like a hand waving goodbye.